continue our study through the book of Judges together this morning. We're going to look at the second judge, Ehud. Now, technically in Hebrew, his name would be more something like Ehud, but in my brain, it's locked in as Ehud. So I'm not even going to try to do that because it'll mess me up through the whole sermon, all right? But we're going to look at Ehud, and I feel like I need to give a little disclaimer, or at least maybe an apology to the ladies in this room, because I feel like this is a text that was written to the inner 10-year-old boy of every male in this room. It is a fascinating and wonderful and kind of disgusting and amazing text. And it's always been one of my favorites. It just really resonates with me. And it is that way on purpose. I've been saying over the last few weeks that the book of Judges is a book of theological history. The author's intent as he writes this is not just to give us the details and facts of what happened on the ground. He is ordering and arranging this content in such a way that he might convey a message of theological importance. And in this text, we're going to look at Judges 3:12-30, the story of Ehud. He uses not only historical events, but he uses ambiguity and irony, satire, hyperbole, and caricature to the point that this story that we're going to look at together this morning almost feels like a cartoon, like a comic, and that's done on purpose. It's done to make a point. So how about we dive in, starting in verse 12. It says, the people of Israel again did the evil in the sight of Yahweh. This is the pattern, the cycle of the book of Judges. Israel, who has been rescued and redeemed by God, brought out of slavery in Egypt, delivered through the wilderness into the land of promise, who has entered into a covenant with God to be his peculiar and special people, a kingdom of priests. Israel, instead of following Yahweh, forgets Yahweh. Israel, instead of serving Yahweh, begins to serve the gods of the peoples of the lands. Now, the author doesn't even get into the details. It's been established firmly in the opening chapters. That's what the evil is. It's forgetting Yahweh and going after these other gods. And once again, Israel is doing that. So they're forsaking the God of life and serving these other gods. And so the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel. Eglon, the king of Moab. Now, as is so often the case in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, names mean things and they matter. Eglon is the diminutive form of the word that means calf or cow or bull. So the name Eglon literally means little calf. Little calf. Hold on to that. It's going to matter. Little calf, Eglon, is the king of Moab. Now, Moab is not within the land of Israel. Moab, the land of the Moabites, is back in the Transjordan area, on the other side of the Jordan. And the Moabites are actually related to the Israelites. You remember that Abraham had a nephew, Lot. And Lot, he had some challenges where he lived, and his wife got turned into a pillar of salt, and his daughters took advantage of him. It's a nightmare of a story, to be honest. But Lot had some sons, and one of those sons was named Moab, and from him we get the descendants, the Moabites. So they're related to the Israelites. And so this Eglon, little calf, the king of Moab, came against Israel because they had done what was evil. They did the evil in the sight of Yahweh. But he doesn't come alone. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites. Now, the Ammonites are another one of the descendants of Lot. Lot had another son, Amnon, and his descendants become the Ammonites. And the Amalekites, they're kind of hard for us to figure out exactly who they come from, but it seems like in the scriptures that the Amalekites are related to Edom, which is related to Ishmael. So they're actually related to Israel as well, even more directly. So what we have here, this is fascinating. Israel's in the land. They have sinned against Yahweh. So what does Yahweh do? He brings in their relatives to teach them a lesson. He brings them in, and they came and they took possession of the city of palms. Now, this is a way of referencing the city of Jericho. And Jericho, we're familiar with, as we looked in the book of Joshua. It was the first place when they entered in the land, the first major battle between Israel and the nations of the land took place at Jericho. And it's a marvelous story full of God's supernatural, providential grace on behalf of Israel. God delivered Jericho unto them profoundly. And they leveled it. And at the end, Joshua, if you remember, Joshua places a curse upon anyone that would rebuild Jericho or dwell within there. And you would think nobody would take him up on that. But unfortunately, not only does Eglon here do it, but others do it. And even other Israelites much later during the monarchy will attempt to do it. So it's fascinating to me that what we have here is God is bringing this group of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Amalekites, he's bringing them from outside the land into the land as punishment upon Israel. And it's fascinating to me how and where he does it. Because he does it in the exact same way that Israel entered into the land. So I got a little map here for you. You'll see the Moabite area is down over there that's where Reuben's clan took possession. Their allotment was in the Transjordan area on the other side of the Jordan, east of the Dead Sea. And down farther south is where the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Amalekites come. And they come up on the east along the Dead Sea, come across the Jordan River, and they set up camp in Jericho. And if that looks familiar to you, it should, if you've been here as we've been studying this together, because that's exactly how God brought Israel up into the land. Like that's not accidental. God's trying to make a point here in a lot of different ways. And it says this, it says, the people of Israel then served Eglon, little calf, the king of Moab, for 18 years. I said it last week, I'm going to say it again. When we come across these sentences in these stories about how long that the Israelites had to endure the humiliation and the bondage and the suffering of slavery, don't rush over that. 18 years is a long time to be a slave. 18 years of raising crops that are not yours to do with as you please. 18 years of raising cattle that are going to go to feed someone else. 18 years where you can't provide and build a legacy for your children and your grandchildren. 18 years where you don't have the freedom to be or do what you want to do. 18 years in the land of promise living as a slave. Consequences of sin are always brutal. It always brings death. And God has given them the freedom to either serve him or serve these other gods. And tragically, the story of Judges is that over and over and over again, they reject God in favor of these other gods. And they bring tragedy upon themselves. For 18 years, listen to me carefully, Israel is suffering not unjustly, but justly. This is what they have chosen. And verse 15 says, the people of Israel cried out to Yahweh. They cry out. Again, I wish it might be a cry of repentance, but I think the text really indicates it's just a cry of pain, a cry of frustration, a cry of, this hurts, get me out of it. The people of Israel cried out to Yahweh, and Yahweh raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud. Ehud. Now, Ehud's name means something. It means, where is the splendor? Ehud. Where is the majesty? Where is the splendor? Where is the beauty? It's similar to another name we find in the Old Testament, Ichabod. Where's the glory? Where is it? Imagine that you're an Israelite woman in this time of bondage under little calf Eglon, the king of Moab, and you deliver a baby into this world where they're not going to be free, where they're not going to serve Yahweh. They're going to be under the oppression and bondage of a foreign king. And you can imagine the scenario where a mom is looking at this beautiful baby, and this should be this moment of incredible joy, but instead she's full of fear and anxiety. What's going to happen to my child? My child's going to grow up as a slave. My child is not going to grow up the way. And so, what does she name him? Where is the splendor? Where is it? Because I'm looking around and it's not anywhere that I can see. That's who Ehud is. Where is the splendor? And Ehud is the son of Gera, the Benjamite, and he is a left-handed man. How many lefties we got here this morning? I'm a lefty. There's a few of us. I did a little research on this week. It's interesting. The number of, the percentage of the population that's left-handed for the bulk of time has been very, very low, maybe 3 to 5, sometimes 7%. Today, it's up to like 10 to 12%. And what I found fascinating is nobody has any explanation as to why that may be, right? Now, that has nothing to do with the sermon. It's just an absolute freebie for you, all right? He's a left-handed. Now, I'm left-handed, so this has always resonated with me since I was a child. Ehud, the left-handed judge. But it actually doesn't say that he was left-handed. In the Hebrew, what it literally says is he was bound in the right hand. He was bound in the right hand. Ehud had a deformity. He had a handicap. There was something wrong with his right hand. So he was known as a left-handed man. And this is fascinating because he's a Benjamite. Comes from the tribe of Benjamin. Anybody know what Benjamin means? It means son of the right hand. Come on now. The son of the right hand, Benjamite, Ehud, is bound in the right hand, so he's left-handed. Where is the glory? Right? So, I mean, like, if you're reading this in the Hebrew, this is all jumping out at you, and you're like, oh my gosh, something's happened. Like, this is being built. Ehud, the left hand, can't use his right hand. He's from the son of the right hand tribe. It says the people of Israel sent tribute by him to little calf, Eglon, the king of Moab. I was reading one of the commentators that I read this week. He said, why did they send Ehud with the tribute? Well, because his deformity, his inability to use his right hand in his culture and in his day made him a significant liability from the perspective of warfare. The way that warfare would be done, you'd have a sword in your right hand and maybe a shield on your left hand, a spear in your right hand, maybe, and you would line up next to the person. And if everybody's right-handed and you line up together, you can protect each other, you can guide each other, you're going to move together. There's a synergy that comes when everybody's on the same page. But you take some left-handed dude who's got his sword or spear in the wrong hand, and he's in the middle, and all of a sudden, he might be stabbing the wrong guy. And your flank's going to be open. And why did they send him? Because Ehud was broken. It was a significant handicap. Let him take the tribute. He's good for that. And who really wants to take the tribute? To bring the money, the grain, the cattle, the works of art, the things that you have labored over, sweat over, and hand them over to another person? Nobody wants to take the tribute. So Ehud gets sent to Eglon, the king of Moab. And Ehud, made for himself a sword. So Ehud's going to go and he's going to deliver tribute, but he makes some preparations in advance. So he makes for himself a sword, sharpened with 2 edges. So this is a sword that's going to be used for thrusting. It's meant to penetrate. It's roughly a cubit in length. You all know what a cubit is, right? The cubit in the ancient world is a length of measurement. Generally, a grown man's the distance between their elbow and the tip of their fingers. It's roughly 18 inches long. So when we think of a sword, we're probably thinking of something bigger culturally when we think about swords. From our perspective, this might look more like a dagger. Here's I don't know how well you can see this, but this is an Assyrian relief carving in stone of, weird dog-headed god type thing. But he's holding a dagger. This would be similar to the sword that is constructed by Ehud. It's sharp on two sides, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh underneath his clothes. So what we know about Ehud is he's got a plan going into this. He is prepared in advance. He's made for himself a sword, and he's actually going to use his very handicap to his own advantage. See, the king is going to have guards. To come into the presence of the king, you're not going to come in with weapons. They're going surely to search those that bring the tribute. Assassination would always be on the radar of the king and his guards. And an ordinary, normal assassin or soldier would come in, would be right-handed, and they would have their sword on their left leg. That's how they drew their swords, crossbody. So he knows that going in, they're probably going to be checking all those left legs. But he's left-handed. So he puts it under his robe on his right leg and goes into the presence of the king with a sword, prepared to take action. Now it says in verse 17, he presented the tribute to Eglon, little calf, king of Moab. We don't know much about Eglon except this. He was a very fat man. You say, well, that's a mean thing to say. Like, that would get you canceled in our culture really quickly, right? But sometimes you just got to call it what it is. Eglon was so this is intentional. In fact, the fatness of Eglon takes center stage throughout the story. In fact, 3 different words for fat are used through the story. It's not just largeness of body, but it also means dullness of mind. Eglon has grown fat on the suffering of Israel. He is a large and very fat man. Now, it says, when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute, but he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal. Let's just pause for 1 second before we continue with the story. Because this is one of those little details where the geography really matters. I showed you how Moab and Eglon coming into the land just mirrored how Israel came into the land. If you remember, when they came into the land and they crossed the Jordan, how did God bring them in? The priests went in, and when their feet entered the water, the Jordan split, and they walked across on dry land, just like they came out of Egypt. And if you remember, in the middle of the river, they gathered 12 large stones, one for each of the tribes. And when they came across and the waters continued flowing again, they went to a place called Gilgal. And there at Gilgal, they used those stones and built a memorial unto the Lord. There, the generation that grew up in the wilderness was circumcised. There, they renewed the covenant. Gilgal is this place that is sacred to Israel. At Gilgal, there is a memorial stone signifying the covenant and God's faithfulness. But now, during the time of the judges, during the time when everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes, when he comes towards Gilgal, what does he see but the idols of the gods of the land? So he turns back and he says to the king, I have a secret message for you, O king. That is such a powerful sentence. There's something about our innate human curiosity. Like if I pull you aside and I go, I got a secret for you. There's going to be something in you that's going to like, what is it? I want to know. What is it? Come on, tell me. It's like there's something that's profound and powerful about, hey, I got a secret for you. Now, the Hebrew word here, devar, that's used for, I have a secret message for you. It can mean word. It can also mean thing or object. I've got a secret present for you. I've got a secret something for you. He puts out the bait to Eglon, little calf. And Eglon commands, silence! And all his attendants went out from his presence. So they're out there on the road. He's with the king. The king brings him back to the palace, takes him into his private area, and has all the guards leave him alone with Ehud to hear this secret message. There's something, I think, here representative of the greed of Eglon. This unsatisfied longing. It's never enough. Here he's been ruling over Israel for 18 years. He's got them in bondage. He's got them in slavery. He's grown literally fat at the work of their hands and the sweat of their brows. And yet he always wants more. What's the secret? Tell me the secret. So he foolishly sends out his bodyguards, foolishly sends out his attendants, and secludes himself in private with Ehud. Now, you can say, well, Ehud's deformity might have been visible. To Eglon, he must not have looked like a threat. He's not patted down. He allows him into his inner sanctum. And Ehud said to him, as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber, and he said to him, I have a message from God for you. It's not the Blues Brothers, but it's close. I have a message from God for you. It's actually exactly what he said before. He just changed one word. Instead of I have a secret message for you, it's I have a divine message for you. I have a divine message for you. Now, he just upped the ante. First, he starts with this secret. Now he says, I've got this divine gift to give to you. And what does Eglon do? It says, he arose from his seat. What is it? I'm ready. And this is where it gets fun. Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, and he did not pull the sword out of his belly. And then the dung came out. You see where I was going with that inner 10-year-old boy? Like, this is an amazing story. I get to preach about left-handed people, swords, and dung, right? Like, you didn't know that's what you were getting this morning, but that's what you're getting. Like, you're supposed to see this. It's comical on purpose. Here's Eglon, little calf, stabbed through, spilling out. The great king of Moab is left a crumpled corpse covered in dung. Then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. When he had gone, the servants came, and when they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he's relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. So Ehud locks the door from the inside and then somehow escapes. I think, you say, well, how did he get out? If he locked it from the inside, how did he get out? Personally, I think he climbed down the latrine. That's icky, but it goes with the story, right? So he leaves, and the servants come up to the door, and they find that it's locked, and they think, oh, Eglon's having a little private time. Right? The Hebrew euphemism here is he covered his feet. He's covering his feet, which is their way of saying he's going to the bathroom. So it says they waited until they were embarrassed. They waited a while. It's like, give the guy some time, give him his space. But at some point, it gets a little too awkward, okay? When he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them, and there lay their Lord dead on the floor. But Ehud escaped while they delayed. And he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Sarah. He goes to his home territory. He goes back to the land that had been allotted to the Benjamites and up into the hill country, Ephraim to the north. That's where he goes. It says, when he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. It's the shofar. It's the ram's horn. You've probably heard or seen them blown. It's not a musical instrument. You know, nobody hears a shofar and says, I could dance to that. But the shofar, it'll get your attention. And that's what it's designed for. It's used to call Israel to worship, and it's used to call the army to war. So Ehud goes out into the hills, and he blows the trumpet, and the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, follow after me, for Yahweh has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him, and they seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites and did not allow anyone to pass over. That's just simple good battle strategy. Okay, so think back to that map that I showed you. They go around Jericho. They go to the Jordan, the fords of the Jordan. Why? So that the Moabites can't escape back to Moab, and so that reinforcements from Moab can't come in to help them out. They go and they cut off the retreat, and they cut off the lines of supply and reinforcements. It's just smart military strategy. In fact, we're going to see this play out 2 other times, chapter 7 and then again in chapter 12. 2 of the other judges do the exact same type of move. And it says they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites. About 10,000. Now as our culture has taught us to think, when we read 10,000, we're like, well, that must have been 10,000. Like, well, what if there was 9,999? Does that mean the Bible's inaccurate and untrustworthy? There are people that like to play those types of games. You got to understand, this wasn't written with our cultural aesthetic of history. The point is not there were 10,000 people exactly. The point is they defeated an incredibly strong enemy. 10,000 of them, all, now the ESV translates this as strong. They were all strong. But it's another word here that means fat. They were all stout. Not only had Eglon grown fat at the expense of Israel, but his army had grown fat. And it says they were able-bodied men, but not a man escaped. Not one got away. And the point, again, is when God brings deliverance, God brings deliverance. The text ends this way. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. Last week with the first judge, Othniel, we saw the land had rest for 40 years, which is a generational term. Now it's 2 generations. For 80 years, there's no strife. There's no warfare. There's freedom. Israel is no longer a slave to the Moabites. For 2 generations, for 80 years, they experienced peace. It's this amazing, comical, glorious, gross story. And it's written that way on purpose. It shows us the ugliness and the messiness of sin. It shows us the consequences of our choice. And at the same time, it shows God's ability to graciously rescue and redeem a people that absolutely do not deserve it. You know, some people read the story of Ehud and are morally troubled. That Ehud would lie and deceive and assassinate and kill somebody the way that he did. Some people are troubled by that. If that's you, I would want to suggest to you that, the book of Judges is not an ethics textbook. The book of Judges wasn't written to teach us how to make good decisions and what we should do or shouldn't do from a moral perspective. In fact, the whole book is summarized in that sentence over and over again. In those days, the people had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And the question is, what happens when people do what is right in their own eyes? And the spoiler is, it's bad. We go to the book of Proverbs, which says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. If you want to ask the moral, ethical questions of how should we live and what is wise, you don't look to Judges, you'd actually look to Proverbs. That would be a good place to go. The book of Judges is not affirming or even critiquing the actions of Ehud. It's describing how God rescued a rebellious people through somebody as flawed as Ehud for no reason other than God's kindness and grace. There's a sense in which Ehud, and this story of Ehud and Eglon, serves as a figure of Christ. It's a shadow. It points us to what is coming. I spent a lot of time this week thinking about this story and how Christ is revealed in this narrative that we've just looked at together. And there was something that just kept striking me about this. Eglon, little calf, had no clue what was happening when he invited Ehud into his inner chamber. Ehud's plan was a mystery. It was a surprise. It was unconventional. It went against the wisdom of the day. Because of that, Eglon was lulled into a false sense of security, a false sense of strength. Eglon had no clue what was about to happen. I think in that respect, this serves as such a beautiful type of what happened in Jesus. When Jesus came and when Jesus went to the cross, the enemies that put him there, the enemies that guided him to the cross, the enemies that did everything that they could to seek his death, thought that killing him on the cross was a good idea. Boy, in the history of bad ideas, I don't think they get much worse. See, but they didn't know. That's why, in John 13, so John 13, Jesus is having the Last Supper with his disciples. And John 13 starts out this way. In verse 2, it says, during supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. What a heartbreaking and tragic and ugly sentence. Judas, who has walked with Jesus for 3.5 years, Jesus who has loved him so well and perfectly. Judas has seen the miracles. He's heard the teaching. He was there for all of these stories that we treasure so profoundly. He's been with Jesus. And you read this story of Judas's betrayal, and you're supposed to wrestle with it and go, how could he do that? Why would he do that? How could he betray the one who loved him so well? And I don't know that we'll ever fully understand that reality, but part of that answer is right here. It wasn't just Judas alone, but there's a power behind the power. There's an enemy, and the adversary, the enemy, the devil, says, put in his heart to betray him. He was being influenced. He was being shaped. So the enemy, the devil, the one who has rejected God, the one who started the cosmic rebellion in the first place, when Jesus enters into the world, doesn't know what to do. When Jesus begins his ministry and goes into the desert and fasts for 40 days and nights, and the enemy comes to him and tempts him. But Jesus, unlike everyone who had gone before him, resists the temptation. Jesus stays true, unmovable. He will not turn to the left or to the right. He will only do what the Father asks him to do. He will only speak what the Father gives him to speak. Jesus is without sin. And so the enemy who has tried to tempt him, the enemy who has tried to thwart him, the enemy who has tried to stop him, devises a plan to kill him. That'll show him. That'll give me freedom. So the enemy plots and schemes to take out the king, using one of the king's confidence, enters into a heart. Now, I love the next verse, verse 3. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand and that he had come from God and was going back to God. It's a contrast. I'm not going to keep reading the chapter, but it's a contrast in this opening. Here you have the enemy, the devil, establishing this plan that he thinks is going to take Jesus out. But Jesus is absolutely confident in the Father's ability to preserve him, even from death. So Paul in 1 Corinthians says this. He says, among the mature we impart a wisdom, although it's not the wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are. It's not the wisdom of the world. It's not the wisdom of the powers. The wisdom of the world, the wisdom of the powers tends to look like might makes right. The wisdom of the world, it looks like wisdom. But as Paul will say in another passage, the wisdom of the world is folly to God. And if there was such a thing as folly to God, it would be greater than the wisdom of the world. We impart a wisdom. It's not a wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. See, the enemy thought he's taking Jesus to the cross was his plan to destroy him, when all along it was God's hidden and secret plan that through the cross he would defeat death and the enemy. Oh, how the wisdom of God is greater than anything. And he says this, none of the rulers of this age understood this. For if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. If Eglon knew what Ehud had in that sword strapped to his leg, he wouldn't have invited him in. He wouldn't have sent the guards away. He wouldn't have been overly proud and lacked caution. He would have acted incredibly differently. And the enemy and Judas and Pilate and the crowds that demanded Jesus' death thought they were going to achieve their ends through those actions, and all the while God was using it to flip the world upside down. I just think God's amazing. I just don't know that we say that enough. Like God is really amazing and brilliant and crazy, like in such a good way. Paul bursts into praise as he's contemplating this. If they knew, they never would have crucified him. If they knew the power of God, if they knew the wisdom of God, if they knew what God was really going to do, they never would have done it. He says, but as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. Oh, what a beautiful statement. It's like you just hear Paul, you just hear him like, what a God we have. We think all this stuff, we imagine this stuff, we do, but our God is able to do more than we could ever ask or imagine. It's the nature of our God. And there's a wisdom that comes from this world, and in its own way, it seems right unto us. But in the end, it leads to death. There is a wisdom that comes from above. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's hidden and mysterious. And it's beyond our ability to control. You know, his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. As high as the heavens are from the earth are his ways and thoughts from us. I think it's because of that. Because of that, we often choose the quick and easy allure of sin. Let's be honest. Sin sometimes for a little bit will scratch that itch within us. But it always ends up making things worse. It never delivers what it promises. It gives the illusion of control. God doesn't offer that. God asks us to walk by faith and not by sight. He asks us to trust him. He asks us to trust that his wisdom is greater than our wisdom. And so we give up the illusion of control, and that's all it ever is. It's never more than an illusion. He asks us to give up the illusion of control and put our hope and trust and allegiance securely in him. Trusting that he's got more going on behind the scenes that we could ever even imagine or hope to imagine. You know, Paul is here quoting. He says, as it is written. It's most likely he's thinking of Isaiah 64, verse 4. From of old, no one has heard or perceived by the ear. No eye has seen a God besides you who acts for those who deserve it. Is that what it says? No one's seen or imagined a God who acts for those who've got their stuff together and do the right thing. The mystery and the staggering mystery of the gospel is the grace of God. No one has heard of, seen, or imagined a God who works for those who wait upon him. The God of grace. The grace of God is the most staggering, profound mystery hidden for the ages, revealed in Christ. God demonstrated his love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. When we were at our worst, Christ died for us. Before we repented or acknowledged our wrongdoing, Christ died for us. He took the first step. He took the responsibility upon himself. He did for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. He died our death that we might live his life. It is grace, y'all, from start to finish. The story of Ehud, the story of the judges, it's not the story of those judges. It's the story of the God of those judges, the God of grace, the God who works on behalf of those who wait for him, even when they don't deserve it. Family, we have an amazing God. An amazing God. His wisdom is trustworthy. His grace is greater than our sin. His light banishes all darkness. May we follow him. Amen and amen.